1 acre, 11 income streams, $30,000 a year, and not a greenhouse stuffed with specialty tomatoes, not a dairy operation requiring a second mortgage on the equipment alone, not a single product that requires you to go viral or build a social media following before the money starts moving. The homesteaders quietly clearing real income are not running one impressive thing at scale. They are running a dozen unremarkable things simultaneously, none of them sufficient on their own, all of them together producing a number that a single enterprise could never sustain through a bad season, a sick flock, or a market that shifts without warning. Most people hear $30,000 from 1 acre and immediately start looking for the catch. The catch is that there is no single stream producing $30,000. There are 11 streams producing an average of $2,700 each, some significantly more, some significantly less, all of them running at the same time, all of them feeding each other's costs in ways that make the whole system cheaper to operate than any individual component would be if it ran alone. That is the design principle that most homesteading content never explains, because it is harder to film than a beautiful market table, and harder to sell than the promise of one magic product. Before we get into the 11 streams, the honest conversation about why the single stream model fails needs to happen, because most people reading this have already tried some version of it. You identified a product you could produce. You invested in the infrastructure to produce it at meaningful scale. You ran the numbers optimistically in the planning stage and less optimistically when the actual receipts came in. And somewhere in year 1 or year 2, you discovered that the margin between what it costs to produce something and what the local market will actually pay for it is significantly thinner than the content that inspired you suggested it would be. The math that gets left off the screen is the real cost per unit, including your labor at any wage you would describe as fair, the feed or seed or materials that went into every unit, including the ones that did not make it to sale, the equipment depreciation spread across a realistic lifespan, and the market development costs, including the farmer's market fees, the packaging, and the time spent selling that does not show up in any production calculation. Run those numbers honestly against the revenue from a single stream, and the single stream model reveals itself as a design that requires either very low labor costs, meaning you are dramatically undervaluing your time, or very high volume, meaning you need more land and more capital than 1 acre provides. The stack model solves this problem not by making any individual stream dramatically more profitable, but by making the total system dramatically more resilient, and by creating the cost-sharing connections between streams that reduce each stream's individual operating cost. The chickens you keep for eggs produce manure that fertilizes the market garden beds. The market garden produces surplus and scraps that supplement the chicken feed. The worm bins process the waste from both and produce a premium soil amendment that sells at a margin nothing else on the property matches. 3 streams sharing costs across a single integrated system operate at a combined margin that none of them achieves independently. This is not a new idea. It is the oldest farming idea there is, recovered from the agricultural logic that fed families on small plots for centuries, before the post-war agricultural industry convinced everyone that specialization was the path to profitability. The old kitchen gardens and mixed small farms that sustained families through droughts and depressions did not survive because any single enterprise was exceptional. They survived because when one thing failed, 11 other things were still producing. The stack was the original farm model. We are just returning to it with clearer income tracking. Stream 1 is the one that looks least impressive on paper and quietly outperforms everything twice its apparent size. Seed garlic. Not eating garlic, which sells for a few dollars per pound in markets where you are competing with commercial growers who can produce at costs you cannot touch. Certified named variety seed garlic, the planting stock that home gardeners and small market farmers need every fall to establish their own garlic beds, sells for $18 to $26 per pound, because the supply from reputable small-scale growers never fully meets the demand. Varieties like Music, Chestnut Red, German Red, and Porcelain types command the highest prices and have the most established buyer communities. A 100-square-foot bed planted in October and harvested in late June or July produces approximately 80 to 120 pounds of cured, marketable seed stock depending on planting density and growing conditions. At $22 per pound average, that single bed generates $1,760 to $2,640 from a crop that requires planting labor in fall, essentially no maintenance through winter, and harvest labor in summer. The cure time of 3 to 4 weeks before sale means the product stores well without refrigeration infrastructure, and pre-orders placed before harvest eliminate the market uncertainty that kills most small produce operations. Annual income from seed garlic on a modest planting of 2 to 3 beds runs $3,000 to $5,000, making it the highest return per square foot of any field crop on this list, and the stream that most people ignore because it does not produce the visual content that drives attention to homesteading channels. Stream 2 operates in a space most suburban zoning codes have accidentally left completely open. Coturnix quail for eggs, meat, and started birds. Coturnix quail are classified as game birds rather than poultry under virtually every municipal and HOA code in the country. That classification difference means they are legal in residential zones that explicitly prohibit chickens, ducks, and other poultry. They reach laying age at 6 weeks rather than the 5 months a chicken requires. A laying hen produces 280 to 300 eggs annually while occupying 1 square foot of housing, and a flock of 60 hens in a stacked cage system against one wall of a shed or garage generates 4 income streams from a single population. Eggs sold to restaurants and specialty buyers at $6 to $8 per dozen. Dressed birds from surplus males sold to adventurous home cooks at $5 to $7 per bird. Hatching eggs sold to backyard keepers starting their own flocks at $25 to $40 per dozen. And started birds sold to buyers who want laying hens without incubation equipment at $8 to $15 per bird. Combined annual income from 60 laying hens managed as a production flock across all 4 revenue points runs $1,400 to $2,000. Stream 3 turns the pepper bed from a produce line into a branded product with repeat customers. Small batch hot sauce under cottage food laws. Most states allow the production and direct sale of acidified food products, including hot sauce from home kitchens under cottage food legislation, though specific provisions vary significantly by state and need to be verified for your jurisdiction before any production begins. A 40-foot row of mixed pepper varieties produces enough fruit across the season to fill 200 to 400 bottles of finished sauce depending on recipe yield. At $6 to $8 per bottle through farmers markets, direct online sales where permitted, and local retail accounts, a single sauce line generates $1,200 to $3,200 in annual revenue against a raw material cost of pennies per bottle when the peppers are grown on your own property. The margin difference between selling fresh peppers and selling bottled sauce from the same peppers is the difference between a produce transaction and a brand transaction. A customer who buys fresh peppers buys them once and grows their own next season. A customer who buys a bottle of sauce with a label they remember and a flavor they developed a preference for comes back every season and tells people about it. The hot sauce is not a pepper business. It is a relationship business that happens to start with peppers. Stream 4 generates income from the land itself without producing anything on it. Photography location rental. A field of sunflowers in late summer. A weathered fence line in golden afternoon light. A barn with honest age in the siding. A meadow with sufficient visual depth for a portrait background. These are assets your property either already has or can develop for minimal investment that photographers in your region are actively searching for and willing to pay $75 to $200 per session to access. Family portrait sessions, senior photos, engagement shoots, and brand photography for small local businesses all require locations that look like somewhere rather than nowhere. And most photographers in most markets have access to more clients wanting outdoor portrait sessions than they have quality locations available to host them. A property listed through photography location platforms or marketed directly to local photographers through regional Facebook groups generates $1,500 to $2,500 annually from bookings concentrated in spring and fall when outdoor portrait demand peaks. Your labor involves unlocking a gate, establishing a simple booking system, and occasionally mowing a path. The land is already there. The income comes from connecting people who need what the land looks like to the gate that leads to it. Stream 5 runs in a shed, costs almost nothing to start, and produces 3 separate sellable products from the same population of animals that require no veterinary care, no housing beyond stacked plastic bins, and no feed beyond the kitchen scraps and wheat bran your property already generates. Worm farming for castings, live bait, and compost inputs. Red wiggler worms maintained in a 5-bin stacking system produce finished vermicastings at a rate of approximately 1 pound of castings per pound of organic material, processed weekly in a mature system. Premium vermicastings sell to organic gardeners at $8 to $15 per pound, a price point that reflects their genuine agronomic value relative to any other organic soil amendment available at retail. Live red wigglers and night crawlers from the same system sell to fishing bait buyers at $3 to $5 per dozen, and the worm system's ability to process kitchen scraps, coffee grounds, paper waste, and garden trimmings from the rest of the property eliminates tipping fees and compost inputs simultaneously. Annual income from a 5-bin system maintained in a shed corner runs $1,200 to Arce to $1,800, with a feed cost approaching zero. Stream 6 heats your home and generates income from the same managed resource. Coppiced firewood from a woodlot. Coppicing is the ancient practice of cutting certain hardwood species at the base and allowing them to regrow from the established root system, producing multiple straight stems from each stump rather than requiring replanting after each harvest. Correctly managed coppice trees, species including hazel, willow, ash, and various oak types, produce regrowth faster than a newly planted tree because the established root system supports immediate vigorous new growth from the cut stump. A quarter-acre managed coppice woodlot on the least productive land of a 1-acre property produces 3 to 5 cords of seasoned hardwood annually once the rotation is established, which typically requires 3 to 5 years of initial growth before the first harvest cycle. Seasoned hardwood sells for $250 to $400 per cord in most markets, with prices at the higher end of that range when sold in late fall and winter, when buyer urgency is highest. Annual income from 5 cords at $300 average runs $1,500, with the additional benefit of providing the property's own heating fuel from the same managed resource. Stream 7 converts the dairy animals you may already be keeping from a cost center into a product line. Goat milk soap and value-added dairy products. 2 Nigerian dwarf or mini Nubian does in full lactation produce more milk than a small household can consume as a beverage, and selling raw milk directly faces regulatory constraints that vary significantly by state. Converting that surplus milk into artisan soap, fresh chèvre, cultured butter, or aged soft cheese transforms a product that retails for very little into products that retail for significant multiples of the milk's commodity value. A single bar of artisan goat milk soap retails for $7 to $12 at farmers markets, craft fairs, and through Etsy shops, with a raw material cost of under $1 per bar, including the milk, oils, lye, and fragrance or essential oil additions. 2 does in full lactation provide enough milk for 40 to 60 bars of soap per month during the lactation period. At $9 average retail price, that is $360 to $540 per month from soap alone during the 6 to 8 month lactation window. Combined with fresh chèvre sales where regulatory conditions permit, and breeding stock sales from annual kitting, 2 does generate $2,000 to $3,000 annually from products that most dairy goat keepers pour down the drain because they do not know what to make with the surplus. That is 7 streams, and the property is already generating meaningful income from seed garlic, quail, hot sauce, photography sessions, worms, firewood, and goat products simultaneously. The remaining 4 streams are where the system crosses $30,000, and where the connections between streams begin compounding the total in ways that make the math genuinely exciting. Part 2 covers those 4 streams, the specific mistakes that kill this system before it reaches its potential, and the build order that makes the difference between a stack that compounds and one that overwhelms. 7 streams running simultaneously, and the property is already generating meaningful income from seed garlic, quail, hot sauce, photography sessions, worms, firewood, and goat products. But the remaining 4 streams are where the system crosses $30,000 annually, and more importantly, where the connections between everything already running begin compounding in ways that make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Stream 8 requires no land at all. It requires knowledge you have already accumulated by running the first 7 streams, teaching through workshops and paid farm visits. Once a property is visibly productive, a consistent and predictable demand emerges from people in the surrounding area who want to learn what you are doing and how you are doing it. A 3-hour Saturday workshop on seed garlic production, quail keeping, worm farming, or soap making draws 6 to 12 paying participants at $40 to $75 per person in virtually every market in the country. 4 workshops per month across spring and fall, the periods of highest interest, generate $2,400 to $9,000 from events that require no additional infrastructure beyond what the working property already provides. The farm is the classroom. You are already there. The knowledge already exists. The income comes from connecting curious people to both. Stream 9 converts your most consistent waste product into your highest margin retail item: premium potting mix and garden soil blends. The worm castings from Stream 5, the compost from the market garden and kitchen scraps, and the aged manure from the quail and goats combine into a finished potting medium that costs almost nothing to produce and retails at a margin that packaged soil brands built entire companies around. A 40-quart bag of finished blended potting mix sells for $12 to $18 at farmers markets and through direct pre-order to the same gardening customers already buying seed garlic and seedlings. Monthly production of 50 bags from materials the property generates as byproduct anyway produces $600 to $900 per month during the spring planting season without a single additional input purchased from outside the system. Stream 10 addresses the calendar gap that most homestead income systems leave completely undefended: winter wreath and dried goods sales. The late season and dormant season months, when fresh produce income collapses, are precisely when consumer demand for dried herbs, decorative wreaths, preserved botanicals, and handmade seasonal goods peaks. Lavender bundles harvested in summer and dried, seed heads and ornamental grasses from the property edges, foraged and cultivated materials assembled into wreaths, selling at $35 to $75 each. A focused 4-week production and sales push in November and December, leveraging materials that cost nothing because they came from the property anyway, generates $1,500 to $3,000 during the exact window when every other stream slows down. This is not a side project. It is the system's answer to winter. Stream 11 closes the loop on everything: breeding stock and starter animal sales. Every productive animal population on the property, the quail flock, the goat herd, the worm bins, produces surplus individuals that beginning homesteaders and backyard keepers need to start their own operations. Started quail-laying hens sell at $8 to $15 each. Registered Nigerian dwarf dolings sell at $200 to $400, depending on lineage and conformation. Established worm colonies in pre-populated bins sell at $40 to $80 to buyers who want a functioning system without the 90-day startup period. Combined annual income from breeding stock and starter animal sales across all 3 populations runs $2,000 to $4,000, sourced entirely from animals the system was going to produce regardless. Add those 4 streams to the first 7, and the total crosses $30,000 annually on a single managed acre. The mistakes that kill this system before it reaches potential are predictable: building too many streams simultaneously before any single stream is stable, underpricing everything because the impulse to compete on price is strong and the impulse to value your own labor is weak, and neglecting the connections between streams, treating each enterprise as isolated rather than building the shared cost relationships that make the whole system cheaper than its parts. The build order matters more than most people realize. Start with seed garlic and worms. Both require minimal capital, both produce in the first season, and both generate the customer relationships that every subsequent stream sells into. The stack builds on itself. That is the design. That is the whole point.